And the question is that the bill be now read a second time. I call the honourable member for Charlton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the appropriation bills and the amendment moved by the opposition. Before I go to the substance of my speech, I did enjoy the reference from the member for Eden Monaro to his long experience in the defence portfolio, including as a Chief of Staff. It would be remiss of me not to point out that this was during a period of the Children Overboard affair, which saw the most gross politicisation of the Defence Force in our nation's history. But I move on to the substance of my speech, which will touch on the Reserve Bank and the transfer of $8.8 billion to the Reserve Bank Reserve Fund, which was contained within this bill. While Labor supports the supplementation of the RBRF, this transfer has been done in the most nakedly political manner. The decision to inject all the funds this financial year is driven by base political motives. The Treasurer wants to pad out this year's projected budget deficit, blame it on Labor and then reap the dividends from the RBA in future years to bolster those budgets. The Governor of the Reserve Bank has appeared before the House Economics Committee late last year on December 18, and while I won't comment too much on this because the report is yet to be tabled, the public Hansard from this hearing does provide some startling revelations. These revelations include that at the first meeting of the Reserve Bank Governor and the new Treasurer, when you would expect the Reserve Bank Governor to outline his priorities for the Reserve Bank and ask for the support from the Treasurer, he did not go to that meeting seeking the immediate injection of the $8.8 billion. He did not go to the member for North Sydney and say, "I need all this money urgently, I need it now." Furthermore, the Governor indicated that the RBA expects to be in a position to return dividends to the government in August 2014. So we're in a situation now where, because of a decision by the Treasurer, we'll see $8.8 billion injected into the Reserve Bank as late as May this year, and then only 6 or 8 weeks later, the Reserve Bank will turn around and provide a dividend to the government. This is a pea and thimble trick of the highest order, Mr Deputy Speaker. Those on the other side have already tried to claim that the last Labor government drove down the RBRF in some irresponsible manner. This is utter rubbish. According to the last RBA annual report, I quote, "The RBRF is essentially the Reserve Bank's capital. Its primary purpose is to provide a capacity to absorb losses when it is necessary to do so. The RBRF served this purpose when it was substantially depleted in 2009-10 and 2010-11 by large accounting losses as the exchange rate appreciated." Let me repeat that point, Mr Deputy Speaker. Direct quote from the annual report. The RBRF served this purpose. It served its purpose as the capital for the Reserve Bank to handle movements in our currency. We have no argument with the need to supplement the RBRF. What we have an argument with is the naked political manner in which the Treasurer is doing this. In his testimony, Governor Stephens was very clear that there was no crisis necessitating the urgent top-up, and I quote, "The bank was not insolvent and not close to being insolvent. The notion of insolvency for a central bank is an odd one anyway." So we have an artificial confected crisis by the Treasurer. We have him going to a meeting where he proposed a one-off injection with the goal of having his future budgets bolstered by this nakedly political move. And this is consistent with the various assumptions and changing in parameters that we witnessed in my EFO. And it's the Australian taxpayer that pays for all this, because the annual interest bill on this $8.8 billion transfer on current long-term Commonwealth bond rates is around $400 million, or just over $1 million a day, Mr Deputy Speaker. The interest cost of this political exercise for just 10 days equates to the cut I would like to talk about next, which is also contained in these bills, and that's the sneaky and cruel cut of $11.5 million to the Building Multicultural Community Grants program. In November last year, I raised in the Federation Chamber the situation concerning 2 community groups in Charlton, the Filipino-Australian Society of the Hunter Valley and Vedi Samati Newcastle, as well as the Ethnic Communities Council of Newcastle and the Hunter region. These groups had been successful in receiving grants through the Building Multicultural Communities Grant program. However, they were advised by the new government that this funding was under review. I want to be abundantly clear. These grants were not election promises by the Labor Party. These grants were from a program that was established, and the funding of these grants, the awarding of these grants, was announced by the previous government before the caretaker period began, and they were awarded under a proper process and fully funded in the 2012-13 budget. I wrote to Minister Andrews in November on behalf of these organisations calling for the government to honour these commitments. The only response I received was a pathetic one-line response from the Minister's Parliamentary Secretary that advised that the Australian government has made a decision about the BMCP funding, and the outcome of this decision had been communicated to all organisations that were awaiting this advice. A one-line response where he didn't even have the guts, where the Parliamentary Secretary didn't even have the guts to repeat their decision to cut what was a government program that was fully funded. Mr Deputy Speaker, I've kept in close contact with these groups, as has my colleague, the member for Newcastle, in affected groups in our electorate, and this grant cut is very disturbing. These groups have now been officially advised by the Department of Social Services that they will not be receiving this funding, and this is truly a shocking move by a callous and calculating government, which says one thing in opposition and does another when they're in government. This funding had been allocated, including $22,000 to the Filipino-Australian Society to build a new kitchen and install additional doors in their hall. I met with members of their society when this grant was announced, and I cannot emphasise how grateful and excited they were by this grant and how they were looking forward to using this money to grow their society, improve the services they provide not just to Filipino Australians but the broader community that enjoys the facilities around Naves Hall. This is a society that had done great work raising funds and goods to help victims of Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and it is an absolute disgrace that they now had this funding cut by the new government. Vedi Samati was to receive approximately $100,000 to extend their hall, including further car park provisions and an upgrade to their audio system. This was another great example of a local community using grants smartly to improve their facilities and provide additional services to the very significant Indian community that calls the electorate of Charlton and the broader Hunter area their home. And this was another ethnic group that is suffering under the new government. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is an absolute disgrace, and we will keep fighting to continue.
Order. It being 4:30 p.m, I propose the question in the House to now